Physical Form Update 2024-0810. I did the scheduled weekly measurements today. The values are as follows. First of all, we have the picture. Then we can see 44.4 kilograms in terms of my dominant hand grip strength. I also here have a screenshot from Mir Smart One, which is a device that measures peak expiratory flow, so two values that approximate lung function. The first one would be PEF, peak expiratory flow. The second one is PEV1. Then we also can see that here I would have 552 as the highest value, which then is usually taken, and the FEV1 is 5.33 liters. I then have my body measurements here, which also then result in calculated waist ratios, which in this case the waist to hip ratio is 0.82, which seems to be where I land in basically almost all of the measurements. Now the next thing would be already going into part of the interpretation, but also adding more data to basically this post here. Surprisingly, after a few days of having digestive issues, I had diarrhea. My weight still remained at the measured minimum from 1 to 2 days earlier, giving me another record low in the last months of 73.2 kilograms at 13.8% body fat. I looked up a few additional averages, but I might mention them later on. Now, this is the weight on the Garmin Index S2, which is the bioimpedance scale I use. It resulted in a body fat of 13.8. 2 days before, it resulted in 13.2. So these measurements might also be taken with some caveats. This is then what it looks like in Garmin Connect in the app. We can see that additionally it calculates bone mass, or rather estimates bone mass, as well as body water. So body water would be at 63%. Ever since I began taking creatine, I think I have at least higher body water. This could be due to the creatine intake. Then the bone mass would be 5.2 kilograms, but other scales estimated this at 3 kilograms. So probably not too much to make out of these values. Skeletal muscle mass at 32.7 kilograms, also depending on the measurement method. If I take a look at the in-body scale at my gym, which I will shortly then we see that the values are slightly different. Body fat then at 13.8, and the resulting BMI would be 21.9. Then my PV1 and expiratory flow there is still no recognizable upward trend to be seen. I started now almost a year ago, and we can see that it basically just goes up and down a little bit, but I rarely ever hit my expected value of, I think, around 610 of, well, my data input of 6 foot tall, ethnicity white, and a few other things I cannot remember right now. This would be the FEV1, so the predicted value here would also be close to, it is also significantly higher. It is above 6, so you can see here the line I think is the predicted value. My blood pressure fortunately seems to again have stabilized at the lower end of now about 1 year ago, which seems to an extent to correlate reversely with weight as well as body fat. The higher body fat and weight, the higher blood pressure, at least in my case. So we can see here that here I had a very good phase of blood pressure, all in the green. These were readings in the beginning, only morning, then I switched to morning and evening, and now I am again only taking morning measurements, but I have been now for maybe half a year. So basically there is seemingly a change in, at least my blood pressure, at least in this one standardized measurement that is after I wake up, after the longest sleep of the day. And if we compare this, then we can see that so this goes up and then down a little bit, and this also has been down and then went up and now is down a bit. And this has been of the last 2 months maybe, and also here we can see that in the last 2 months my blood pressure seems to have stabilized a little bit. Then we can also take a look at the body composition during the same time. So this is the last 12 months. In Garmin it is called 1 year, but it is the rolling average basically of the last, not the rolling average, but if there is an average readout, then it would be the rolling average. So in terms of Samsung Health here, we can see the body composition, and this data is now either now from the Garmin Index S2 or from the scale I had before in non-athlete mode. So I measured a couple of times on both of these, and they seem to kind of hit the same values, which is now why I can also take this. So I have on the Garmin scale, which I had now since March, which now would be of about 5 months, I have an average of 15.7% body fat, the yearly average, but of course the yearly average in this case does not include yearly data. And in Samsung Health it shows that my yearly average body fat has been 15.8% in the same period. But we also can see the body fat basically going up in this period, where also my blood pressure and also my weight has been up. So what I assume is that mostly my fat went up and down. Now, the heart rate in this case also, well, there is not much to be said, but I will now mention this in what I've written. A few days ago, I deleted all body composition measurements of the Galaxy Watch 4 due to not feature of a separate display in Samsung Health, and Samsung Health being the previous main health and fitness platform I used before Garmin. I also deleted all from InBody synchronized data. So with the InBody app, so my gym has a InBody scale, and with this app from the scale, I could potentially synchronize the data to Samsung. That consistently measured in another body fat level 4 to 8% lower compared to the home bioimpedance scales like the Garmin Index S2, the Camtron, or an older scale I had access to in 2016 for a few months. Unfortunately, in the app, I used my Camtron scale till late 2023-10 had a model called Athlete Mode activated that retrospectively, given the assumed higher accuracy of the InBody 270, which is the device my gym has, with the handles compared to the home scales with no handles, might actually have been more accurate with the lower resulting body fat readings. But the Garmin Index S2 also has no such mode, so I'm kind of taking the higher body fat as of now. Thus, the largest set, mostly daily body fat measurements is now in Samsung Health body composition in Garmin only since switching to the Garmin Index S2 2024-3, because Garmin Connect does not take basically external body composition even with some synchronization apps. So this is then the resulting body composition over the last year, 15.8%, at least on a bioimpedance scale, which does not include handles. The correlation to body fat levels as well as resting heart rate seems to be not that pronounced, assuming lower body fat would result in lower resting heart rate. But due to the graph also displaying the high heart rate, not as scaled as the others, occurred change is possibly also negatively impacted by the lack of scaling of the y-axis. So if we would not have to also display high heart rate here, then we might see a little bit more, but you can also see that the bump seems to be not as pronounced as with the weight, but of course also only to a certain extent, because, well, we have a scaled down graph here. Now, taking a look at the last 4 weeks of average high heart rate in Garmin seems slightly alarming, as it began to drop quite, so basically it begins to drop off almost to the hundreds. So I did a run as of this morning, and the run as of this morning was at a heart rate of 130, and I barely could run faster, which might have been due to basically double training. So I trained yesterday in the afternoon and then again trained this morning without basically one big day sleep in between, or night sleep in between. This also seems to correlate, and this has been going on for now a couple of weeks, so this might be also some of the reason to explain this data. This also seems to correlate also with observations. It also seems to correlate with also observations. It seems to become harder to get my heart rate up in recent weeks. In addition, Garmin has ranked down my maximum heart rate, only shown on device, a few times in about the last year, starting from, I believe, 196 to now 193. A common estimate here is to take 100, not 100, but 220 minus your age, which then would be kind of the maximum heart rate one could achieve still. A few months ago, it oscillated at least once back up to 194. But now for 2 to 4 months unchanged at 193, which also impacts the borders of my heart rate zones, meaning, spoken absolutely, it should be easier to get into higher zones like zone 4 or 5, I meant it to write here, due to their lower minimum entry heart rate. The InBody measurement at the gym resulted in an even lower weight, which marks a year-long record with 72.7 kilograms, but I don't take really that record because, well, I kind of see it as a separate data set that also results in separate body fat percentage levels. But I assume that this would be more accurate, so the 7.9% probably are a little bit more accurate, and it, as I mentioned already, would be somewhat, or at least seemed somewhat likely, that if I had still something like Athlete Mode on my previous scale, but also in Garmin, then I might still result in an actual body fat result that would be closer to the one from the InBody scale. Now, the weight also is a little bit lower. The weight, basically this InBody scale seems to weigh in at maybe 0.3 kilograms, 0.2 kilograms lower. Additionally, I then usually urinate once before I go to the gym. Additionally, compared to the morning, which means that I'm still fasted but I still then have less hydration in me, or water in me, or fluid in me. The visceral fat again dropped to level 1. I still couldn't find valid information on whether a drop to 0 would be more optimal compared to 1, but the visceral fat level, as we can see here, has been also going up and down, and I think the 1 seems to be the best, because visceral fat, at least as one has heard about maybe quite often, seems to be fat that is not very useful in terms of optimizing for longevity. Now, there could also be an essential fat level in terms of visceral fat. Maybe that's level 1, but maybe it's also level 0, and the visceral fat level was only kind of introduced in order to indicate that something is bad. So if it would be 0, it would be optimal, but I don't know at this point in time. We can also see the other graphs, so the metabolic rate goes a little bit up and down, at least the calculated one. The weight goes up and down, but now has kind of arrived at the 72.7. I don't assume that I can hold this weight because, well, I have been eating not that much in the last couple of days, because my hunger seems to have been turned down by my sickness. The visceral fat level again dropped to level 1, which I already showed here, and here we can see the graph, which is a little bit more zoomed in. As evident in the graph that includes all body measurements, I have, beginning with 2023, 0403, the weight of 72.7, and this marks the lowest. I did not know whether this is, I don't know whether this is a full sentence. The lowest body fat percentage measured within body was 7.2%, that with the daily standardized picture taken on the same day looked like this. So you can see that there is not much of a difference. We can scroll back to the other image, but OneNote has a little bit of trouble loading this much. The difference is, if we put it side to side, maybe there would be a difference, but it also might be. I actually seem to have a little bit higher body fat here, as seen in the kind of lower abs sections, usually with me. I suspect that some of the weight loss might be due to recently being able to reduce my carb intake, mostly by further standardizing my nutrient intake with a higher proportion of meal shakes. Due to usually taking my ideally 25 grams of creatine with drinking water, but doing less so, if less in home office, I suspect that the visual observation of less muscular volume therefore could be a combination of reduction in water weight from unintentional reduction of creatine intake to maybe an average of 10 to 15 grams per day, as well as lower average level of glycogen village. Another surprise today was the slight increase visible in the height measurement with 183.2 centimeters, which is visible here. Possibly to be explained by a lower average time standing, as sleep hour average in the last days due to sickness increased. Thus, similar to how minoxidil supposedly alters the anagen phases or increases their proportion, or them proportionate to the other ones, which I don't know the name of, the interspinal discs might have had a proportionally increased time to expand. This extends the over weeks measured variability of my morning, more after longest daily sleep measurements, to a range of 181 to 184 centimeters, depending on whether cut off or rounding down, beginning with the 183 centimeters. The eGym 1 Rep Max tests, as the eGym 1 Rep Max tests are connected machines that were all below the values of the last ones, or the ones last week, probably mostly due to training time laying in around hour 1 to 3 of being awake. A below average training intensity on the trainings where I weighed in at the body scale at the gym can be seen as a symptom of optimization with two opposing constraints. I either can optimize for the lowest weight, which means I go in dehydrated and ideally also fasted, or as much fasted as possible, or I would optimize for high training performance, which seems to occur while still in first few morning hours, but having ingested already my first meal, given that I was already hungry, seems to be additionally increased by additional carb intake, at least temporarily, but due to long-term diet optimization seems to be only result in a long-term negative impact on my body composition if I have a higher proportion of carbs. Of course, it also depends on the carb source. Carbs are not just carbs. Importing values from circumference, hip, waist, Garmin, yearly resting heart rate VO2 max into eGym resulted in the following eGym age. So this is the picture taken from the eGym hub at my gym. So we have a real age of 28. We also can see a bio age of 24, which is made up of the components strength, which is 30 years, flexibility 22. I already was down at 21 at some point of the time, but the last measurement was not that optimal. Then we have the metabolism at 23. The lowest I could get this measurement to was 22. The strength is actually at the lowest it has ever been since I started doing these measurements with eGym. And the cardiovascular age is at 23. I cannot remember that I had it down to 22, which is also it's fairly hard, I would say. So my VO2 max estimate from Garmin is 57 again at this point in time. It was already 58 as of maybe a week ago, but my resting heart rate is also fairly low. I input the yearly average of 49, which is not that low, but still the cardio age is not that good. The third component of the cardio age here is blood pressure, but I now don't have an average readout of the year because, well, Garmin as well as Samsung Health now have this range which they show. In terms of the interpretation of the body or the body fat analysis on the eGym Hub, it says that the weight would be in the normal range, the body fat percentage would be in the low range, but as you saw in the images, it's a little ridiculous, I think, that the body fat mass as well as this other thing is ranked as very, very low, especially since I also then on the Garmin S2 have significantly higher body fat that is not even optimized for. It is now optimized again for the Garmin Fitness Age, but this is maybe another story. Increased cravings and last day cravings for glucose and or fructose have increased noticeably. Possible factors: lower leptin signaling due to lower at body weight, but mostly lower body fat. Also on the lower side of body fat, 2 times in the last weeks broke the no fruits rule, eating blackberries from a wild bush after my weekly runs at the river. Due to my high sensitivity as shown in last years to such changes, this might already have had an impact or might already have made an impact. On last grocery haul on Friday, had to stop the part of myself that began to crave bananas. Questioned whether craving might have occurred due to lower potassium levels caused by diarrhea of now about half a week. Potassium is already included in daily multivitamin and mineral. A few days ago I added half a tablet of the electrolyte capsules I use for my morning supplements. I added them to my morning supplements, half a tablet, as with given average nutrition of the last months several times had cramps in calves or hamstrings lasting for seconds to in about 2 instances minutes and resulting in one case days of sore muscles in that case. So here we can see the back of the electrolytes I am using, and the daily dose that is recommended is 2 tablets. So now I am taking an additional half tablet in order to supply maybe additional magnesium to my body, and the cramps seem to be somewhat reduced already. Another noteworthy observation of the last weeks has been the following: if my 7-day if my 7-day HRV decreases below the seeming threshold of about 70 milliseconds, frequency of acute hearing loss on usually one ear begins to increase. Sudden drop in perceived loudness of usually one ear, recovering possibly usually over minutes to hours, pointing towards an interpretation that these could be interpreted as midterm stress markers. Including today's daily training, this puts my Garmin dashboard into the following state. We can see my training status is maintaining. I do have quite a lack of high aerobic load focus or load. The training load is optimal, but it is also not that high. I already was at 1.3k at one point in time, but maybe that's not sustainable over the long term for me. I don't know. The weight now, it would be nice if body fat also showed here, but what one could also argue, it is already included in the fitness age, which is in my case 18 in Garmin. Then we have the blood pressure, which has been normal in the last couple of days. We also have the HRV status. In this case, it's 86. I had in the last weeks, I would say, and then maybe 2 months before that, period in which it was above the hundreds, which was quite unusual for me, I would say, because in the last 1.5 years since I began tracking with a Garmin watch, it has not been that high, often in the 30s to 50s or 40s to 60s or something like this. Endurance score has been quite dropping to 6.3k. It also already was as high as 7.3k. My running VO2 max is now again 57. It was for a couple of days on basically the threshold to 58, and it showed already 58, but now it is not. The hill score at 38, also very low. The heart rate, it also only shows the heart rate of the last 7 days and not the yearly, but the heart rate of the last 7 days and also the last weeks was fairly low at sometimes 42, sometimes 45, sometimes 41 or something like this. The lowest I seem to get, at least of the last weeks, in terms of daily resting heart rate is about 39 or maybe sometimes 38. Calories in versus out is not that useful because I not very consistently track. The steps also are just daily, the floors and so on, all daily. So the only thing that would additionally be interesting would be the fitness age, which it just shows the fitness age. Then the running lactate threshold and the cycling FTP, as I also note here, the lactate threshold as well as cycling FTP, not updated for now about 6 months. I had access once to a smart trainer, to a smart bike, and then I think it calculated the lactate threshold as well as the cycling FTP. Sleep duration due to tracking issue, had sleep schedule set to 24 hours, tracking inaccurate, so this is kind of a bug. I assume it also showed sometimes 52 hours for daily sleep duration.